My daughter shaving her sister's head in her sleep the night before prom was the best thing she ever did. I woke up to my teenage daughter Kayla's piercing screams. I ran into her bedroom and couldn't believe what I saw. She was completely bald, her blonde hair scattered across her pillowcase. She was sobbing, telling me her little sister Reese must have shaved her head while she was sleeping. She stumbled to the bathroom mirror and started screaming even louder when she saw her reflection. Prom was in 8 hours and she was supposed to be a shoo-in for queen. Now it was ruined. "Where's Reese?" I demanded, and my husband found her sitting on her own bed in her unicorn pajamas with his electric razor on her nightstand. "Reese, what did you do?" I asked, trying not to scream while Kayla sobbed in the bathroom. "I had to stop her from going to prom," Reese said in that small voice she uses when she knows she's in trouble but thinks she did the right thing. This was my baby who still crawled into Kayla's bed during thunderstorms. The same little girl who Kayla taught to ride a bike last summer. The one who followed her big sister everywhere asking endless questions about everything. I couldn't believe she would sabotage her sister's big night like this. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Kayla's boyfriend Steven let himself in like he always did on Saturday mornings. He came upstairs calling about corsage colors and stopped dead when he saw Kayla's bald head. "What the hell happened to your hair?" he asked, then quickly rearranged his face into concern. "Baby, don't cry. We can fix this. Maybe get you a nice wig. You'll still be the prettiest girl there." Kayla was crying harder now. Steven pulled her against him while glaring at me like this was my fault. "Did Reese do this?" "I always said that kid was weird. This is assault, Mrs. Adams." Reese appeared in the bathroom doorway, still in her unicorn pajamas. "I cut off all her hair so she couldn't go to prom with you because you're mean to her." "Reese!" I yelled, but she kept talking in that determined little kid voice. "You hurt my sister all the time. I see the purple marks on her arms where you grab her too hard." The bathroom went silent. Steven laughed, but it sounded forced. "Kids make up crazy stories, Mrs. Adams. Tell her, Kayla. Tell your mom how good I am to you." Kayla wouldn't look at anyone. I felt ice spreading through my chest. "I took pictures on Mommy's phone when Kayla was sleeping," Reese said, her voice getting stronger. "You push her into walls. You hit her tummy where nobody can see. Then you buy her presents after so she won't tell." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened my photos. There they were. Close-ups of Kayla's arms with finger-shaped bruises, her ribs with dark purple marks. I felt my stomach drop. "Oh my God," I whispered. "Kayla, is this true?" Steven's face was getting red. "Those could be from anything. She plays sports. This is insane. I spend hundreds on her. I'm taking her to prom in a limo." My husband appeared in the doorway. His whole body was tense as he looked over my shoulder at the photos on my phone. "Kayla, baby, why didn't you tell me?" I asked. My voice was breaking completely. Steven's grip on Kayla tightened visibly. "We're leaving right now. This is completely ridiculous. Get dressed, Kayla." "She can't go anywhere if she's too embarrassed about her hair," Reese said simply. "That's why I shaved it all off while she was sleeping, so she'd have to stay home safe." Steven tried switching tactics. His voice went artificially sweet. "Reese, sometimes me and Kayla play rough when we're fooling around. It's not abuse, it's just passion. You're too young to understand boyfriend-girlfriend stuff." My husband stepped fully into the bathroom and said, "Let go of my daughter right now." "But then you did this, mister," Reese said. Everyone turned to look at her again. She pulled out her little pink tape recorder that she used for making pretend radio shows and pressed play. Steven's voice came through tinny but clear. "She said it was from yesterday when he was waiting in our living room for Kayla to get ready. Yeah, tomorrow night after prom." His voice rang out. "I'm gonna get her completely wasted at Jake's after party and make sure she can't say no this time. Already got the stuff to put in her drink from my brother. Time to lock that down before college, you know? Nothing keeps a girl around like getting her pregnant." I felt like I might throw up right there on the bathroom tiles. Kayla made this horrible wounded animal sound. She tried to pull away from Steven, but he held on tighter. "That's fake," Steven said. Sweat was dripping down his face now. "You're all crazy. That's not even my voice. This whole family is insane. You were going to put something in my daughter's drink?" I whispered. My whole body was shaking with rage that I'd never felt before. "You were going to assault my baby?" Steven finally let go of Kayla. He started backing toward the door, but my husband moved faster. He blocked the only exit with his whole body. I could see the muscles in his jaw clenching as he stared at this boy who'd been hurting our daughter for who knows how long. "You don't want to do this," Steven said. He was trying to sound threatening, but his voice cracked like the child he really was. "My dad's a lawyer. You touch me and I'll ruin your whole family." My husband took another step forward. Steven pressed himself against the wall, looking for another way out. But Steven suddenly stopped panicking, looked at my husband, and said in the most ice-cold voice I've ever heard, "I really don't think you want to do that, Mr. Adams, and I think you know why." My husband's face dropped. The color drained from his skin and his hands started shaking as Steven stood there with this smug look on his face. I could see my husband's whole body go rigid and something cold settled in my stomach. Steven knew something, and whatever it was had my husband scared. The bathroom felt way too small with all of us crammed in there, and I could hear Kayla's ragged breathing behind me. My husband took a step back and Steven's smile got wider. I pushed myself between them and pulled out my phone with shaking fingers. I hit the record button and held it up so Steven could see the red light blinking. My voice came out steadier than I felt when I told him to get out of our house right now, or I was calling 911. Steven just laughed and said his dad would destroy us for this. He said we had no idea who we were messing with. Then he shoved past my husband hard enough to make him stumble into the wall. I I kept recording as Steven stomped down the stairs, making sure to knock the family photos off the wall as he went. My husband followed him down while I stayed with the girls, who were both crying now. I heard Steven yelling something about lawyers and lawsuits from downstairs. The front door slammed so hard the whole house shook, and then his car engine roared to life outside. His tires squealed as he peeled out of our driveway, going way too fast for our quiet street. My husband came back upstairs and his face was still white as a sheet. He looked at all of us standing there in the bathroom and said we should go to the master bedroom to talk. We all filed down the hallway and into my bedroom, where my husband locked the door behind us. Kayla sat on the bed still in her pajamas, with her bald head reflecting the morning light from the window. Reese climbed up next to her sister and took her hand. I stood there looking at my husband and demanded to know what Steven had on him. My husband sat down heavy on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. After a long moment, he looked up and told us that 2 weeks ago he'd seen bruises on Kayla's wrist at dinner. He said he'd gone to the school the next day to confront Steven about it. He found Steven in the parking lot after baseball practice and grabbed him by the shirt. He admitted he'd shoved Steven against his car and told him if he ever touched Kayla again, he'd kill him. Steven had recorded the whole thing on his phone, including the threat. My husband's voice was thick with shame as he explained how Steven had played the video for him right there. He said Steven told him if he ever interfered again, he'd send it to the police and press charges for assault. The anger bubbled up in my chest, mixing with the fear until I felt like I might explode. I told my husband we had to call the police right now about everything. The abuse and the planned drugging and all of it. My husband nodded but said he was worried about Steven's recording being used against him. He said Steven's dad really was a lawyer, and a nasty one at that. Kayla started sobbing harder and said she didn't want her dad to get in trouble because of her. She kept saying it was all her fault for dating Steven in the first place. Reese crawled into her sister's lap and wrapped her little arms around Kayla's neck. She told Kayla in her serious little voice that none of this was her fault. She said bad people do bad things, and that's on them, not on the people they hurt. I picked up my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line while my family huddled together on the bed. The dispatcher answered, and I explained we needed to report domestic violence and a planned assault. My voice shook as I told her about the bruises and the recording of Steven planning to drug my daughter. She said she'd send an officer to take our statements and asked if we were safe right now. I told her yes, but that the boy had just left making threats. She said to stay inside with the doors locked until the officers arrived. While we waited, I asked Kayla to show me her phone with Steven's messages. She unlocked it with trembling fingers and handed it over. The texts were all there going back months. Messages where he told her what to wear and who she could talk to. There's something really strange about how Reese had all this evidence ready. The photos on Mom's phone, that tape recorder with Steven's voice. I'm curious why an 8-year-old was secretly gathering proof like some tiny detective instead of just telling her parents what she saw happening to her sister. Apologies after he hurt her, where he blamed her for making him so angry. Threats about what would happen if she ever tried to leave him. One message made my stomach turn, where he said he'd make sure everyone at the school knew she was worthless if she broke up with him. Another one said he owned her and she better remember that. There were hundreds of them, and each one made me feel sicker than the last. I started taking screenshots of everything and sending them to my own phone as evidence. Kayla watched me with tears running down her face and kept apologizing over and over. My husband pulled her against him and told her she had nothing to be sorry for. He said we should have seen the signs and protected her better. Reese piped up that she'd been trying to tell us for weeks, but we thought she was just jealous of the attention Steven got. I grabbed my phone again and told Kayla I needed to take pictures of all the bruises for evidence. She nodded and lifted her shirt slowly, showing dark purple marks across her ribs that made me feel sick. I took photo after photo, making sure each one was clear and showed the date stamp. She turned around and there were more bruises on her back, some yellow and fading, others fresh and dark. My hands shook as I documented each one while she stood there in her bra, looking at the floor. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later and 2 officers came up to the bedroom after I let them in. I showed them Reese's recording first, playing Steven's voice talking about drugging Kayla at Jake's party. The younger officer's face went hard as he listened, and he asked for a copy right away. They took notes while Kayla showed them the bruises, and I scrolled through all the controlling text messages on her phone. The officers called for a detective and said one would be here within the hour since this involved planned assault and a minor. We waited downstairs while they made calls and filled out paperwork. Detective Nora Gomez showed up 45 minutes later wearing jeans and a blazer like she'd been called in on her day off. She introduced herself and said she specialized in cases like this, then asked to interview each of us separately. She started with Kayla, taking her back upstairs to her bedroom while the rest of us waited in the living room. I could hear their voices but not the words, and it went on for almost an hour. When it was my turn, I brought everything upstairs. My phone with the photos, Reese's tape recorder, screenshots I'd taken of Steven's messages. Detective Gomez looked at each piece of evidence carefully and told me we'd done exactly the right thing by documenting everything and calling right away. She asked about Steven's family, and I told her his dad was a lawyer named Julian Franks, who had a big practice downtown. She wrote that down and asked if Steven had ever threatened us before today. I told her about him saying he'd ruin our family if my husband touched him. She interviewed my husband next, and he came clean about grabbing Steven by the shirt 2 weeks ago at the school. He explained he'd seen fresh bruises on Kayla's wrist and lost his temper, threatening Steven to stay away from her. Detective Gomez said she understood a father's protective instinct, and while it wasn't ideal, she'd note the context in her report. When she interviewed Reese, our little girl sat up straight and explained in her serious voice why she'd shaved Kayla's head. She said she knew it was wrong, but she had to keep her sister safe from the bad boyfriend who was going to hurt her worse at prom. The detective actually smiled and told Reese she was very brave for protecting her sister, even if cutting hair wasn't the best way to do it. Detective Gomez recommended we take Kayla to the emergency room right away to have her injuries documented by medical staff. She handed me her business card and said she'd be in touch about next steps, that she was going to interview Steven and his family next. We drove to the hospital in silence except for Reese asking if she was going to jail for cutting Kayla's hair. At the emergency room, they took us back quickly when I explained we were there for domestic violence documentation. The doctor was a woman who spoke gently to Kayla as she examined each bruise, measuring them with a ruler and having a nurse photograph everything. Kayla squeezed my hand hard when they asked about the stomach bruises, and she had to explain how Steven would punch her there, so no one would see. They did a full exam and documented 17 separate bruises in various stages of healing. The nurse gave us copies of everything for our records and for the police. A social worker came in while we were waiting for discharge papers, carrying a folder full of pamphlets about domestic violence resources. She explained that the hospital was required by law to report this to the authorities, which we'd already done, and gave us referrals for therapy and support groups. She talked to Kayla about safety planning and what to do if Steven tried to contact her. We were signing the discharge papers when my husband's phone rang, and Julian Frank's name showed up on the screen. My husband answered and put it on speaker without saying anything. Julian's voice was loud and angry, saying we were going to pay for these false accusations against his son, that he'd sue us for everything we had for assault and defamation. The social worker's eyes went wide and she grabbed her phone to record, while Julian kept ranting about how we'd regret messing with his family. My husband finally said we were at the hospital documenting Steven's abuse and hung up. The social worker said she'd add that recording to the file as evidence of witness intimidation. We left the hospital around noon and drove home in complete silence except for Reese asking if Steven was going to jail. My husband kept checking the mirrors like he expected someone to follow us. When we turned onto our street, I saw it right away. Steven's black car was parked across from our house, just sitting there with the engine running. My hands started shaking as I grabbed my phone and called Detective Gomez's number from her card. She answered on the second ring and told us to drive past our house and park somewhere safe while she sent a patrol car. We pulled into the grocery store parking lot 2 blocks away and waited. 10 minutes later, she called back saying officers were at our house and we could come home. 2 police cars had Steven blocked in when we got there. One officer was at his window writing something while Steven sat there with his arms crossed looking mad. The officer came over and told us Steven claimed he was just driving by, but they'd warned him he wasn't allowed near our property or any family member. They took pictures of his car there and added it to the case file as a violation. Steven peeled out when they let him leave and the officers stayed until we got inside safely. That evening while I was making dinner, my phone rang with a number I didn't know. It was Maddie Coleman from the school counseling office asking how Kayla was doing. She'd heard what happened from another staff member and wanted to help. She said she could arrange for Kayla to get her assignment sent home so she wouldn't fall behind while dealing with everything. I thanked her and said that would help a lot since Kayla wasn't ready to face everyone at the school yet. An hour later, Detective Gomez called with an update. She'd tracked down Jake and interviewed him about the party plans for after prom. Jake got really nervous and admitted Steven had asked him to make sure Kayla's drinks were extra strong that night. Steven had also mentioned getting something special from his brother to put in them. The detective said Jake seemed scared and was cooperating fully now that he understood how serious this was. She also told me she'd looked into Steven's older brother Tyson Grimes, who had 3 arrests for drug stuff, including selling pills to kids at the community college. She was working with a judge to get a warrant to search Steven's phone and car for evidence. The next morning, a woman from Child Protective Services called saying they needed to do a home visit since minors were involved in witnessing domestic violence. My stomach dropped even though I knew we hadn't done anything wrong. She scheduled it for the next day and said it was just standard procedure to make sure the kids were safe. That night was awful. Every car that drove by made us jump. My husband got up 3 times to check the locks on all the doors and windows. Around midnight, I heard crying from Kayla's room and found both girls in her bed. Reese had crawled in with her big sister and they were holding each other tight. Kayla's face was wet with tears, and Reese was rubbing her back the way Kayla used to do for her during thunderstorms. I sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed their hair until they both fell asleep. The CPS worker showed up right at 9 the next morning with a clipboard and a serious face. She interviewed each kid separately in their rooms while my husband and I waited in the kitchen. She spent almost an hour with Kayla asking about our home and if she felt safe here. Then she talked to Reese, who apparently told her all about why she cut Kayla's hair and showed her the pictures she took. When she finished, the worker actually smiled and said we were handling this situation really well. She found no concerns about our parenting and said she was impressed with how protective the girls were of each other. She gave us some pamphlets about trauma and kids before she left. That afternoon, I got a call from someone named Tabitha Wise who said she was a victim advocate assigned to help us. She explained we could file for an emergency protective order to keep Steven away legally. She walked me through all the paperwork over the phone and said she'd help us prepare everything with our evidence. Reese taking pictures before the haircut shows some serious planning skills for someone her age. This kid thought 3 steps ahead like she's playing chess while everyone else is stuck on checkers. We spent 2 hours going through all the photos, recordings, and documentation from the hospital. She said our case was really strong and a judge would probably grant it right away. The next day, a certified letter arrived from Julian Frank's law office. My husband opened it and his face went red as he read. It was 3 pages of legal threats saying we'd assaulted his son and made false accusations that were damaging his reputation. It said we'd be sued for everything we had if we didn't drop the charges immediately. It also mentioned the incident with my husband grabbing Steven's shirt at the school, saying that was assault on a minor. My husband's hands were shaking as he took pictures of every page and forwarded them to Detective Gomez. She called back within minutes saying this was perfect evidence of witness intimidation and to keep any other threats documented. Monday morning came too fast, and Kayla had to go back to the school wearing a beanie to cover her bald head. I drove her myself because she was too scared to take the bus with everyone staring at her. The parking lot was already buzzing when we pulled up, and I could see kids pointing at our car through the windows. Kayla grabbed my hand so tight it hurt as we walked through the front doors together. The whispers started right away, and I heard one girl say something about Kayla making everything up for attention. Another group of kids moved closer to us, and one boy told Kayla they believed her, and Steven was a jerk anyway. The principal was waiting in the main office with a woman I recognized as Maddie Coleman from the counseling department. Maddie took us into her office and pulled out a new class schedule for Kayla that had different routes through the building. She explained that security guards would be watching for Steven, and they changed Kayla's locker to a different hallway completely. Maddie walked us through the new path to each class and showed Kayla a safe room she could use if she felt scared. My phone rang while we were walking, and it was Detective Gomez saying she had news about the search warrant. She'd gone to Steven's car that morning with other officers and found a small plastic bag stuffed under the driver's seat. The pills inside looked like Rohypnol, and they were rushing them to the lab for testing, but she was pretty sure what they'd find. Within 2 hours, Steven was in handcuffs being walked out of his house while neighbors watched from their driveways. Detective Gomez called again to say he was charged with possession of controlled substances and conspiracy to commit sexual assault. His dad bailed him out before dinner, but at least there was an official case number now and real charges filed. 3 days later, we sat in a courtroom for the emergency protective order hearing with Tabitha Wise beside us. I had to stand up and tell the judge everything about the abuse while Kayla sat there shaking in her chair. The judge listened to Reese's recording of Steven planning to drug Kayla, and his face got harder with every word. He asked my husband about grabbing Steven's shirt at the school, and my husband admitted everything, but explained he was protecting his daughter. The judge said he understood a father's reaction, and focused on the pattern of abuse Steven showed over months. Steven's lawyer tried to argue this was just teenage drama that got blown out of proportion, but the judge wasn't buying it. He granted the temporary restraining order right there, and set strict conditions that Steven couldn't come within 500 feet of Kayla. The next week, the school held their own disciplinary hearing about Steven's behavior on campus. The principal reviewed all the evidence, including the drug possession charges, and Steven's history of aggressive behavior in the hallways. They suspended him immediately pending the criminal investigation, and banned him from all school property, including graduation. Steven's dad stood up yelling about lawsuits, but the school board didn't back down at all. Kayla started seeing a therapist who specialized in helping teenagers who'd been hurt by boyfriends or girlfriends. The first few sessions, she just sat there crying and couldn't really talk about what happened to her. The therapist was patient though, and slowly Kayla started opening up about how Steven made her feel worthless. She talked about being scared all the time and never knowing what would set him off or make him grab her. The therapist helped her understand that none of it was her fault, and abusers are really good at making victims think they deserve it. Our whole family started going to therapy together once a week to figure out how to help each other. The therapist explained that Reese saw her sister in danger and took the only action she could think of to protect her. It wasn't the right way to handle things, but it came from love and fear mixed together in a kid's brain. Reese told the therapist she'd been watching Steven hurt Kayla for months and felt so small and helpless about it. She said cutting Kayla's hair was the only way she could think of to keep her sister home and safe that night. The therapist helped us all understand that families dealing with abuse need to learn new ways to talk to each other. We practiced having hard conversations about feelings without anyone getting blamed or shamed for what they were going through. Kayla and Reese started doing exercises together where they could share their fears in a safe way with rules about listening. I learned that I needed to watch for signs I'd been missing and create space for my kids to tell me anything. My husband had to work through his guilt about not seeing the abuse sooner and his anger about the shirt-grabbing incident. The therapist said trauma affects whole families, and we all needed time to heal from what Steven did to us. She gave us homework to do between sessions like writing in journals and having family check-ins every night at dinner. It was hard work, but I could see my daughters starting to trust again and feel safer in their own home. 3 weeks later, Detective Gomez called while I was making dinner and asked if she could stop by with some updates about the case. She arrived within the hour and sat at our kitchen table with her notebook open, telling us 2 other girls from Steven's school had come forward after hearing about what happened to Kayla. Neither girl wanted to press charges, but they both described the same pattern of grabbing too hard and pushing into walls and buying expensive gifts afterward to keep them quiet. The detective said their statements would help show the prosecutor that Steven had done this before and would probably do it again if he didn't face real consequences this time. The next morning, we got a call from the district attorney's office saying they were moving forward with prosecuting Steven on multiple charges, including assault, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. Julian Franks had already hired 3 lawyers from the most expensive firm in the state, but the prosecutor said our evidence was solid, and they felt confident about getting a conviction. Kayla was sitting next to me during the call, and when she heard the prosecutor mention that she might need to testify, her whole body went tense. After we hung up, she was quiet for a long time before saying she wanted to do it because other girls needed to know they could speak up too, and she wouldn't let Steven make her stay silent anymore. My husband had been dealing with his own legal stuff about grabbing Steven's shirt at the school, and met with a lawyer who looked at all the evidence, and said given the context of Steven admitting to planning to drug and assault Kayla, no reasonable prosecutor would pursue charges against a father protecting his daughter. The lawyer sent Julian Franks a letter saying any further threats or attempts at legal action would be considered harassment, and we would pursue our own charges if he didn't stop immediately. Meanwhile, Reese had started seeing a child therapist twice a week to work through everything she'd witnessed, and the guilt she felt about shaving Kayla's head, even though she'd been trying to protect her sister. The therapist explained to us that Reese had been carrying the weight of knowing about the abuse for months and feeling helpless to stop it, which is why she took such drastic action when she heard about Steven's plan for prom night. After a few sessions, the therapist suggested we look into a restorative justice program, where Reese could make amends for the head shaving in a healthy way that would help her process her feelings. Reese wrote Kayla a 3-page letter apologizing for cutting her hair, but explaining how scared she'd been, and how she didn't know any other way to keep her safe that night. She also started doing volunteer work at the local domestic violence shelter, helping sort donations and making care packages for kids who had to leave their homes quickly. 2 months into the court proceedings, Stephen violated the protective order when his friends started showing up at Kayla's school, with messages from him saying he missed her and wanted to work things out. The first time it happened, Kayla came home shaking and showed me the note one of Stephen's basketball teammates had shoved into her locker. We documented everything and reported it to Detective Gomez, who added it to the case file and warned Stephen that any more violations would result in immediate arrest. But it kept happening, with different friends leaving notes in her books or trying to talk to her in the hallway about giving Stephen another chance. Each time we photographed the evidence and filed reports, building a paper trail that showed Stephen couldn't respect boundaries even with a court order in place. During this time, Kayla started going to a support group at the hospital for teenagers who'd been hurt by boyfriends or girlfriends. Why does Detective Gomez keep finding exactly what they need at just the right moment? Pills under the car seat, 2 other girls coming forward, everything falling into place so neatly makes me wonder about the timing here. The first few meetings, she just sat in the circle and listened to other kids share their stories, but eventually she started talking about her own experience. She met a girl there whose ex-boyfriend had broken her arm, and another whose girlfriend used to lock her in closets when she got mad. They all understood what it was like to love someone who hurt you, and to feel like you couldn't tell anyone because they wouldn't understand or would say you were being dramatic. 6 months after that morning when Reese shaved Kayla's head, the criminal trial finally began at the courthouse downtown. Stephen's lawyer tried to paint him as a good kid from a good family who'd made some mistakes in a relationship, but didn't deserve to have his whole future ruined. The prosecutor laid out all the evidence, including the photos of Kayla's bruises, Reese's recording of Stephen planning to drug her, the pills found in his car, and the statements from the other girls who dated him. When it was time for Kayla to testify, she wore the dress she was supposed to wear to prom and walked to the witness stand with her head high, even though I could see her hands shaking. She spoke clearly about how Stephen would grab her arms hard enough to leave marks and push her into walls when he was mad, and hit her stomach where no one could see the bruises. She described being afraid all the time and never knowing what would set him off or make him hurt her, and how he'd buy her jewelry or flowers afterward, and tell her he loved her too much to control himself sometimes. The prosecutor asked Kayla to step down and called Reese to the stand next. My little girl walked up there in her best dress, the pink one with unicorns on it, and the bailiff had to adjust the microphone way down for her. She raised her right hand and promised to tell the truth in that serious voice kids use when they know something is really important. The prosecutor pressed play on Reese's tape recorder, and the whole courtroom went quiet as Stephen's voice filled the room, talking about getting Kayla drunk and putting stuff in her drink at Jake's party. I watched the jurors' faces change as they heard him laughing about how he'd make sure she couldn't say no this time, and how getting her pregnant would lock her down before college. One older woman on the jury put her hand over her mouth, and another man shook his head looking disgusted. Stephen's lawyer jumped up saying the recording was illegal since Stephen didn't know he was recorded, but the judge cut him off. She said Reese made the recording in her own home where Stephen had no expectation of privacy, and the evidence would stand. Stephen's face went bright red, and he started whispering frantically to his lawyer, who kept shaking his head. The prosecutor asked Reese why she recorded Stephen, and she explained in her little voice that she'd seen the bruises on Kayla, and wanted proof because grown-ups don't always believe kids. 2 days later, my husband took the stand and I could see his hands shaking as he sat down. He told the court about finding the bruises on Kayla and confronting Stephen at the school, admitting he'd grabbed Stephen's shirt, but explaining he was trying to protect his daughter. The prosecutor showed how Stephen had used that incident to threaten and control our family, which was just another part of his pattern of manipulation. Stephen's lawyer tried to make my husband look like the aggressor, but the jury wasn't buying it after everything they'd heard. On the 3rd day of testimony, after hearing from the detective about the drugs found in Stephen's car and testimony from 2 other girls who dated him, the jury went to deliberate. We waited in the hallway for 4 hours, drinking bad coffee from the vending machine and jumping every time the door opened. When they called us back in, the foreman stood up and read guilty on all the major charges, including assault, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and possession of controlled substances. Stephen's face went white and his mom started crying while his dad Julian just sat there with his jaw clenched. 3 weeks later at sentencing, the judge gave Stephen 2 years in juvenile detention, 3 years probation after that, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order keeping him away from Kayla. Julian Franks cornered us in the parking lot afterward, his face red as he threatened appeals and civil suits, saying we'd ruined his son's future over teenage relationship drama. My husband stepped right up to him and told him in this calm, cold voice that his son was a predator who finally got caught, and maybe if Julian had been a better father, none of this would have happened. Julian looked like he wanted to hit my husband, but there were cops everywhere, so he just got in his Mercedes and drove away. With Stephen locked up, something changed in Kayla almost immediately. She started sleeping through the night again and stopped jumping when doors slammed. She decided she wanted to help other girls recognize the warning signs of abuse, and started working with the school counselor to plan assemblies where she could share her story. The first time she spoke in front of the whole junior class, her voice shook, but she kept going, explaining how Stephen had isolated her from friends and made her think the abuse was her fault. After her presentation, 3 girls came up to her privately asking for help with their own situations. The school board called a special meeting after our case and brought in experts on teen dating violence to train all the teachers and staff. They created new protocols for reporting suspected abuse and started teaching healthy relationship classes in health education. The principal told us they'd had no idea how common this problem was until Kayla's case opened their eyes. Meanwhile, Kayla's hair started growing back in soft, fuzzy patches that she'd run her hand over constantly. She tried different hats and scarves at first, then decided she actually liked the super short look and kept it buzzed for a while. She told me the short hair reminded her that Reese loved her enough to do something drastic to save her, and that she was strong enough to survive anything. Reese channeled all that protective energy into positive action, volunteering with us at domestic violence awareness events and helping make care packages for the women's shelter. She decorated each package with her drawings and write notes saying things like, "You're brave and you deserve to be safe." The shelter coordinator said Reese's packages always made the women smile even on their worst days. My husband started leaving work early on Thursdays to be home when the girls got back from the school, something he'd never done before in 15 years of marriage. We'd sit at the kitchen table with cookies and milk while they did homework, asking about their day and really listening to the answers instead of just going through the motions. Every Sunday night, we had family meetings where anyone could bring up anything they wanted to talk about without judgment. Kayla started opening up about small things at first, like feeling anxious about a test or frustrated with a friend, then bigger stuff about learning to trust her own judgment again. Reese would share her drawings from art therapy and explain what the colors meant about her feelings that week. 6 months passed faster than I expected, filled with therapy appointments and court dates, and slowly rebuilding normal life. Our family dinners got louder again with actual laughter, instead of the tense silence we'd had when Steven was around. Kayla joined the debate team and started winning competitions, finding her voice in more ways than one. Reese taught herself to knit and made scarves for everyone at the women's shelter for Christmas. The support group at the hospital became Kayla's safe space where she met other survivors who understood what she'd been through. There was this boy named Eric whose ex-girlfriend had stalked him for months, and he and Kayla started talking after meetings about boundaries and red flags. He never pushed for anything more than friendship at first, just listened when she needed to talk and made her laugh with terrible jokes about their shared therapy homework. When he finally asked her to go to a movie 3 months after they met, he gave her 3 different exit strategies in case she felt uncomfortable and told her his mom would pick them up if she wanted to leave early. They took things so slow that their first kiss didn't happen until 2 months into dating, and Eric asked permission first. Reese got nominated for a citizenship award at the school for organizing a whole campaign about recognizing abuse warning signs after what happened to Kayla. She made posters with simple messages that even elementary kids could understand, and got the principal to approve age-appropriate assemblies for every grade level. The day she won the award, she wore her best dress and gave a speech about how protecting people you love means speaking up even when it's scary. Detective Gomez called us every few weeks with updates, always starting with asking how the girls were doing before getting to the legal stuff. She told us Steven got into 3 fights in his first month at the detention center, attacking smaller kids just like he'd done with Kayla. They moved him to a higher security unit after he broke another kid's nose, and his release date got pushed back another 6 months for violent behavior. His dad tried to appeal the conviction twice, but the judge shut it down both times, especially after seeing Steven's detention record proved the pattern of violence was real. Kayla's graduation day arrived with perfect weather, and her hair grown out to a cute pixie cut that she'd learned to style with little clips. She walked across that stage as salutatorian to huge cheers from our section, where even Reese's art therapy group had come to support her. Steven picking fights with smaller kids in detention really proves the apple doesn't fall far from the entitled tree. Guess those anger management classes aren't on the curriculum yet at Juvie Prep Academy. Her speech talked about finding strength in unexpected places and learning that asking for help isn't weakness, but the bravest thing you can do. She thanked Reese by name for saving her life, and I watched my youngest daughter cry happy tears for the first time since this whole thing started. The college acceptance letters had been rolling in for weeks, and Kayla chose a school 3 hours away, far enough to be independent but close enough to come home whenever she needed. She signed up for a self-defense class that summer and convinced Eric to take it with her, both of them learning to protect themselves in healthy ways. We went dorm shopping together, and she picked out bright colors instead of the dark stuff she'd worn during the Steven months. She put a photo of our family on her desk, including one of her and Reese from after the trial where they're both laughing at something on Reese's phone. The night before she left for college, Kayla crawled into Reese's bed like they used to do when they were little. I found them the next morning tangled up together, Reese's arm thrown protectively over her big sister even in sleep. As we loaded the car, Kayla hugged Reese and whispered something that made them both cry and laugh at the same time. Looking back at everything that happened since that morning Reese shaved her sister's head, I realized that desperate act of love had saved Kayla from something so much worse than missing prom. Our family learned that protecting each other sometimes means doing hard things that seem crazy in the moment, but turn out to be exactly what needed to happen. Thanks for hanging out and wondering about all these questions with me today. It's always interesting seeing where curiosity takes us. Until next time. And hey, like the video, it helps more than you think.